Hey, what is up guys? Welcome back to the channel and welcome back to Gran Turismo 7. So the end of 2023 is fastly approaching and it's now time once again, just like last year, for me to round up my year in GT7. For the first video, we're going to go with a very positive note. I'm going to go for my personal top 10 cars that were released in 2023 for Gran Turismo 7. Quick disclaimer before I do get into this top 10 that my top 10 is probably going to vary massively from your own. So be sure to let me know your top 10 down below. I'll kind of read into all of the top 10s that you leave down below and kind of see what the community as a whole sort of gravitated towards and, you know, kind of what they left to the side. Like I said, a lot of this is going to be from my own personal experience, what I've enjoyed the most through the likes of single player, sport mode, you know, community lobbies and such, and kind of what I've gravitated towards over the year. You know, things such as money and all that stuff doesn't necessarily come into it. It's all about the time I spent with that car and what kind of stands out, making it, you know, my favorite. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most useful car in the world to make this top 10. It's all about the fun factor that I've had with that car over 2023. So let's head straight into it, and first of all I'm going to roll off my honourable mentions. So the 3 honourable mentions that you are going to see are certainly worthy of checking out, so make sure that you do go ahead and get them at some point. They are absolutely awesome, and we're going to start off with the first of the 3, the Porsche 959, one of the best looking Porsche ever made. There's just something about this car that just looks absolutely iconic, and its 200-mile-per-hour battle with the Ferrari F40 is just a thing of folklore and legend inside the automotive industry. So 1.75 million will be able to give you access to this car. Certainly a bit more on the expensive side, however overall it is just a very enjoyable car to drive and certainly a fun overall time. If you haven't already, you need to go ahead and pick this one up. Number 2 is going to be the Jaguar XJ220, the legendary car from Jaguar. I think we all know what the 220 stands for at this point. That was the target speed for this vehicle at the time, the world's fastest production car and one of the fastest cars of all time. Costing 615,000 credits, it's relatively inexpensive in comparison to the 959 we've just looked at, and it certainly performs just as well. This is a fantastic vehicle and I was really happy to see it enter GT7 in 2023. And finally, the Mercedes-Benz 190 Evo 2 makes up the 3rd car on the honourable mentions. This dropped in an update where many other fantastic cars released, and I feel like if this was released at any other time it would have been the highlight of the update, and maybe even then it crept into the top 10. I was just mainly losing out due to the fact that I've had actually very little time overall to drive this car and really check it out more deeply in the way that I would want to. 300,000 credits, it is the cheapest of these 3 honourable mentions. It's a kind of jack of all trades. It can pretty much do anything from race car, tuner, to obviously just a classic big old bulky looking Mercedes. Go ahead and check this one out. So let's get the top 10 finally started and underway after those honourable mentions. Now for number 10 I'm going to go with the Porsche Carrera RS. This came alongside the February update. I believe it was actually the same update that VR came and Grand Valley Highway 1, and I remember just as soon as this car was in the game I put a ton of time into this car. I've spent a ton of time building it, driving it in both its standard form and fully modified form, grinding money with it, driving it in VR. I just feel like overall, whilst to a lot of people it may not be the most exciting, I honestly absolutely love this car. Not only is its looks just absolutely amazing and one of the best looking Porsche ever made, overall just the way it drives, feels and just kind of goes about its day is just absolutely fantastic. I've had a ton of fun with the Porsche Carrera RS. I couldn't recommend it enough. Now I believe in terms of its price point it's rather stable. I think it sits at around about 600,000 credits and I don't think it's gone up ever since it came into the game. So you can pick one up for relatively inexpensive in comparison to a lot of other vehicles, and I think once you start finding that sweet spot with this vehicle you can build a ton of different potential builds from 600, 700 pp, and overall if you want to drive a car or a classic car in VR you really can't go wrong with this one. So coming in at number 9, I'm going to go for the Honda Civic Type R FL5. Now the main reason for this was a long awaited car. You know, a ton of people were, I guess, begging as the typical silhouettes got released for the brand new Honda Civic, and again it just adds that more up-to-date generation of vehicle to an already pre-existing car in the game, and I think that's for me where the sweet spot really is. Not only that, it has a relatively low price point at only 50,000 credits. It actually comes in cheaper than the FK8 that you're seeing on the right hand side of the screen there. So again, you're getting a lot of bang for your buck, you're getting a lot of performance for your buck, and whilst it is front wheel drive, even in my review for this car, I did say that it's just so good at being a front wheel drive car that it almost doesn't necessarily feel like it at times. It's a great performing car, there's a lot of tuning potential in it, and again it can lead to some amazing wacky builds. In terms of the time I've had with this car, whilst it's still relatively low in comparison to something like the Porsche that we've just seen, mainly because it is a later in the year update car, I've just had plenty of time just tuning this since its release, and I've got a ton of different builds for it, and overall it's just a great time. It really is a tuner's dream in terms of a front wheel drive Japanese hot hatch. So if you haven't already, go and check this one out. I'm pretty sure you'll be able to find a tune that suits you. Let's move on to number 8 now. So overall, we don't get many race cars in GT7, but I almost felt like I had to include this. This is the Audi RS DTM. I believe this is a 2019 model when these cars were just absolutely at their peak before they went into the more sort of GT3 era, and I absolutely love this thing. It sits in the second category of cars, so Group 2, alongside the Super GT models and such. It comes in at 1 million credits, so it is a little bit on the expensive side, but you are getting a lot of bang for your buck. You're getting a car with an active DRS system, plenty of tuning capabilities, and obviously that typical amazing Group 2 fuel efficiency. I've had a ton of time with this car. It really does stand out in Group 2 just because of it being currently the only DTM car in the game, and I would absolutely love to see this group of cars just kind of fleshed out inside of Group 2 to obviously go alongside these Super GT cars to kind of go and do one of those dream races. So certainly for me, this was the best of the more, I guess, typical race cars of the year. Obviously the other one being the AMG GT3 and the Mazda Group 4, but I just feel like this edged them out in every single way. It was a much more exciting release. So let's move in to number 7. So coming in at number 7 is going to be the Lexus LFA. Now I know I'm probably going to get a lot of flack for this, and a lot of people are going to think, well, that's far too low down the order. You know, this was the most requested car in GT7 history, and I fully understand that. But for me, this wasn't actually the best car of the update that it came with. Obviously, this car came alongside 7 others in the most recent update, or Spec 2 for GT7, and whilst it is absolutely amazing, I just feel like the extra price point at 1.5 million and the fact that, to be totally honest, you can see that this car is starting to, I guess, age a bit more in comparison to some of the more modern supercars of the game. I do think it's fantastic. I'm not putting it down, and like I said, I mean, this thing's beat over 20 other cars to make it this far in the list, and considering it's only been in the game around about not even 2 months at this point, that's a pretty high praise for this thing. It is a fantastic car. The exhaust note alone, the way it drives, you can really get some fantastic builds with this thing, and in all honesty, I can't complain. I can see why people wanted it. I can see why people absolutely praise this car like a god, but sadly it just misses out on being the best car of 1.40, only by a slight margin. But overall, this is still a fantastic vehicle. You can win it for free by doing one of the master license tests, and I do recommend that if you can, go and do that as soon as possible. So let's move on to another 1.40 vehicle. Again, not the best of the update, and only just slightly beating out the LFA. In fact, I could almost say they were interchangeable. This is the Nismo 400R, and I absolutely love this car. For me, this was the sort of lead car that I was waiting for the longest, and since it's come to the game, I've just had a lot more time with it than almost any other. Maybe in terms of the overall performance and such, it isn't quite as good as the LFA, and it's maybe not as fun to drive at times, but fully upgraded, this car's an absolute blast. You can pick one of these up for 1.8 million, which is not cheap by any means, and I believe this was the most expensive car of the update. But again, it's a tuner's paradise, and that's where I go for most of my vehicles. You know, if I can kind of tune around with it and play around with it, I'm going to get a lot more time out of that car. And like I said, just because of that and just how much I really wanted this car to come to the game, I feel like it only just edges out the LFA because of that. Doesn't necessarily mean that overall it performs any better or that it's overall a better car. I just feel like from personal preference, I've just had more road time with the Nismo 400R, and so it just edges out the LFA in that way. Overall though, a fantastic vehicle and one that you should definitely check out. Again, still not the best from 1.40, only just edging out the LFA, but perhaps being interchangeable with it. So coming in at number 5 is actually going to be a duo of vehicles which came along around about the midpoint of the year. This is the Super Formula SF23, both the Honda and Toyota variants, both good at different things and both surprisingly have different capabilities around a track in terms of, you know, overall how they're going to perform. But for me, this was a fantastic vehicle to come to the game. Obviously for this year, the Super Formula vehicles or category of cars got updated to newer specs, and we first saw this in any game, I believe, in Gran Turismo 7. Now these were kind of, I guess, hinted at for a long time, and they obviously did finally drop. Both are going to cost you $1 million each, however both are absolutely worth it, whether you're racing in sport mode in some of those lobbies, whether you're doing it in custom mode, or whether you're playing through the Super Formula playlists inside the actual single player of the game. You're going to get plenty of track time with these things. They're just absolutely incredible. Now, in terms of saying that they are better than the SF19, that would be an understatement. In my opinion, these absolutely decimate how the SF19 felt, and overall, not only do they look better, feel better, perform better, they're just fantastic all-around cars. This is certainly, for me, a step in the right direction that GT7 needs to go. Their own race series from Japan, getting them updated maybe on a yearly basis or when a big chassis change happens will be fantastic. Hopefully they can learn from this and start implementing more up-to-date Super GTs as well. That would be absolutely spot on. So with that done and the SF23 taking the 5th spot, let's move in to number 4. So number 4 for me is going to be the RCR Garage Civic. Now I do have a major soft spot for this vehicle. Not only is it my favourite generation of Honda Civic of all time, being based on the EG Civic from way back in the sort of early to mid 90s. It was a, you know, tuning street racing icon. Overall, this is just a absolutely bizarre and fantastic car. I had a lot more fun than I ever thought I would. I also got to speak to the guys that actually built this car and find out more about this car, you know, for my review and such. It was just a really cool car to learn about, and the fact is this car is even more brutal in real life than it actually is in GT7, doing the likes of time attack days and just being an outright menace in terms of cool tuning vehicles. I really cannot fault the RCR Garage Civic. It's wonky, it can tip over, it can actually grind money rather well, and in terms of the Nürburgring performance for my review, this thing outperformed plenty of vehicles that it really had no right actually beating. This is a fantastic vehicle. For 300,000 credits you can do much worse. If you haven't already checked out the RCR Civic, I would actually love to know, you know, kind of why, and if you have checked it out, I would actually love to know your opinions on it. I feel like it's very much a mixed bag, especially if people are leaving it on its standard tyres, which in reality it shouldn't really be running on. Although GT Sport classes it as sport tyres, it's definitely more of a full-blown track raced car. So with the RCR Garage out of the way, it's time to, I guess, top off our bronze prize for this year. In at number 3 and taking the first of our podium positions is the Porsche 911 GT3 RS. The 992 generation comes to the game with perhaps the most bonkers model of them all, the GT3 RS. This for me is certainly the best car of 1.40. It was the best car of Spec 2. The way this thing drives is almost on rails. It's relatively cheap at 340,000 credits. I just don't have a bad word to say about this car. It's got insane aero, DRFs, great speed, great handling. It just felt like a very precise all-round package, and that's kind of what I said in my review as well. This is just a fantastic vehicle, whether it's performance, speed, you know, aero. You've kind of got it all just, I guess, absolutely put into this package. It just feels fantastic to drive. You know, this for me is one of the best drivers car in GT7, and like I said, it's not been in the game very long, but the time I've had with it has been much greater than any other car from that Spec 2 update. Just the fact that it appears in these one make events, it's great for racing, it's great to tune, it's just overall a brilliant car, and that's why it just has to take third on the list. I think if this was any other year, the chance of this car actually topping the list would have been much higher. You know, I feel like if it had been in the game longer and I'd have got more time behind the wheel, although I've spent plenty of time racking up miles on this car already, definitely over a period of time, it would be one of those cars I'd look back very fondly on and honestly feel like, you know, this was perhaps in the running for overall best car. You know, it was fantastic from start to finish, and if you haven't already, I really do recommend checking this out. The 911 GT3 RS takes bronze this year in my top 10 cars of 2023. So let's move on to the silver prize. So moving into second position, and the silver prize is actually going to go to the car that I think I've probably used the most this year out of any other vehicle. This is the Honda RA272. Again, coming all the way back in the February update. This car, as soon as it was announced and, you know, first got in the game, was one car that I just absolutely fell in love with. You can see everything working. It's a classic 60s F1 car. It was amazing at money grinding, especially in its early life. But one thing that really stood out to me is just how fantastic this thing is in VR. You know, this for me made VR worth it in itself for GT7. It really does stand out as a fantastic addition to the game. Now for me, if you haven't got VR, then maybe this car won't appeal as much as it does to me, but if you have and you haven't tried this thing out, you really need to. You know, that classic open top cockpit, you know, the races you can do, the brutality of this car being a 60s Formula 1 car, it just feels absolutely fantastic. For me, this is a standout this year in terms of, I guess, unique cars coming to the game. For me, last year it was almost like the Pikes Peak making its, you know, grand return, and for this year in terms of uniqueness, the Honda RA272 really started off GT7's content updates with an absolute bang. It was brilliant from start to finish, and definitely one that I'll be using into the future. Let me know what you think of this one down below. So we're going to finally move into first position. This is the prize for the best car of the year, and I think this one is honestly going to take a lot of people by surprise. Yep, you probably didn't guess this one, but for me, the car of the year was the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution 3. Yeah, you heard that right. In terms of GT7 vehicles that have been added in 2023, this is certainly one that's just racked up the miles without any VR or anything else needed. This for me is the ultimate tuning car. This is the car that I built up in many different forms, whether that be spoilerless, 600 pp, 700 pp, you know, just going absolutely crazy with this vehicle. There is just so much potential in one single vehicle, and this was a car that when it first got announced I wasn't necessarily bothered about. In fact, I was never a fan of the early Evo models. It kind of got around to about the Evo 4 to 5 where I really started appreciating them, and they will always stand the test of time as being my absolute favorite models. However, the Evo 3 kind of dropped in the game, and the more I was doing with it, the more I was tuning it, the more I was building it, the more I kind of just absolutely fell in love with this car. And for me, this is the car of the year. Like I said, it's four-wheel drive. You can build it into a race car, rally car, specific tuning builds. This car is literally a jack of all trades in the best sense, because it absolutely, you know, excels in every single thing this car does. It's relatively cheap as well at 100,000 credits, so you're getting a cheap base car with absolutely massive tuning potential. If you haven't checked this one out, you really need to. Again, it caught me by surprise, and it still surprises me to this day, racking up the miles constantly. So there we have it. That is my top 10 cars that came to GT7 in 2023. Don't forget to let me know your list below. It'll probably be vastly different from me. Like I said, a lot of it's down to track time, tuning capability, or just outright fun. And I feel like I've kind of balanced this list quite well between, you know, the likes of the race cars that came to the game, the more unique cars that came to the game, and obviously some oddballs there that you probably won't expect. Now next time I'll probably go for something a little bit more negative, like the top 10 worst cars or something. There is quite a few that I have in mind of just being pretty poor this year, or just complete letdowns. So I'll probably try and rock that one out before the new year. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know your top 10 down below, and I will see you later on, guys. Take care, have a fantastic Christmas. Peace.